Hello, today we will be learning how to multiply and divide numbers in scientific notation. In your table of contents, go ahead and add multiplying and dividing in scientific notation. I am on page 59 to 60. We're still in Unit 3. Our objective is to be able to multiply and divide numbers in scientific notation. And then our essential question is, how do I multiply and divide numbers in scientific notation? Feel free to pause this video and write all this down. All right, when multiplying in scientific notation, you multiply the numbers just like when we added. So you rearrange those numbers that need to be multiplied. Remember, think of them like coefficient numbers. And then you apply the law of exponents. So remember, when we're multiplying, we add exponents. So this first example, I multiply 4 5/10 times 2. And then I need to add the exponents for the power of 10. Okay, so it would simplify to 9, because 4 5/10 times 2 is 9, and then 10 to the 8. And then you need to make sure your final answer is in scientific notation. And this is, remember, our front number needs to be between 1 and 10. Okay, and then the same thing applies for division. Okay, we want to rearrange, so we are dividing those numbers. So in this case, I would divide 8 by 4, and then we apply the law of exponents. And remember, the law of exponents, when we are dividing, we subtract exponents. So I would divide 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. And then I subtract 6 minus 3 gives me 3. So let's practice a few. And notice today we are going to write our answers both in scientific notation and standard form. Now, you're always able to check your answers using the calculator. Remember, you type it in exactly how you see it. So parentheses 7 3/10 times 10 to the negative 1, close parentheses, times parentheses 0 and 4 thousandths. Okay, but we are going to focus on working these out in scientific notation. So it's a good idea to check your answer that way. So in this case, we don't need to put this in scientific notation. We can just multiply 7 3/10 and 4 thousandths. If we want to put this in scientific notation to rewrite it, that's perfectly fine. So let's do that. It's a little extra practice here. So remember, this decimal point needs to go behind the 4. So I would get 4 times 10. 1, 2, 3. And that's a small number, so it would be negative 3. So I need to multiply 7 3/10 and 4. And then I'm going to add these exponents. So that means I have negative 1 plus negative 3. So 7 3/10 times 4 gives me 29 2/10. And then I would add those exponents. So I would get 10 to the negative 4. Now, I need to check, is the answer in scientific notation? No, we need to move that decimal place. Okay, this has to be between the 2 and the 9. So to write my final answer, it's 2 92 hundredths times, And remember, when I move the decimal place to the left, I'm adding an exponent. So I would get 10, and negative 4 plus 1 gives me a negative 3. Okay, well, if I want to rewrite this in standard form, I would need to move that decimal place 3 places. So that means I'm going to need to add 2 zeros. Okay, and you can see that it moved from behind the 2, and there's 3 place values. Okay, so let's take a look at another one. So I'm going to rearrange this. I want those numbers I need to multiply. So I have 3 times 7 and 2/10 times 10. I'm going to do 4 plus 2. So let's multiply. So 3 times 7 and 2/10. So that gives me, I'm going to write it on the bottom here, 21 and 6/10 times 10 to the 6. Again, I need to move that decimal place because this is not in scientific notation. So I would get 2 and 1600ths times 10, and remember, when we move it to the left, we add 1, so this would give me 7. So that's what it is in scientific notation. So in standard form, I need to move that decimal place 7 places. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I can see that I moved it 7 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this becomes 21,600,000. Okay, so here I'm going to rearrange this again. So 1 5/10 times 5 then I'm going to add those exponents. Okay, so let's multiply 1 5/10 times 5, and that's going to give me 7 5/10. So this time that's already in the correct format. Times 10 to the 8. So I don't need to adjust this one. Now let's put it in standard form. So this time I need to move it 8 places. So I have 7. 5 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is 750 million. Hopefully at this time you're good with multiplying. So let's take a look at dividing. Okay, this is pretty much already arranged for us. I want to divide 9 divided by 3. And remember, we want to subtract exponents. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then I subtract those exponents, so I end up with 10 to the second. Okay, so this one was pretty easy because I didn't need to switch anything around. Let's rewrite it in standard form. So this time I need to add 2 zeros. Okay. Okay, our next one, we need to divide 9 4500ths. And then I want to subtract my exponents over here. So let's do that. 9 and 45/100 divided by 2 and 1/10. So that's going to give me 4 and 5/10. So again, perfect. That's already in the correct form. And then I subtract 7 minus 2 is 5. So let's put that in standard form. So I need to move that decimal place 5 places. It's a large number, so I'm going to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's my 5 places. So this becomes 450,000. Okay, so let's rewrite this one into scientific notation. So I'm going to get 1 and 2/10 times 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be a -5 because that's a small number. This is multiplication, so let's rewrite it. So I am multiplying 1 and 2/10 times 6. And then I'm going to add those exponents. And remember, you can always check this in your calculator. Okay, so 1 and 2/10 times 6 gives us 7 and 2/10. That's already in the correct format. Times, and then I'm going to add -5 plus -2 is -7. So let's rewrite this. So I've got to move that decimal place 7 places. So that means I'm going to need 6 zeros in front of the 7. And then I'm just going to check and make sure. So right here is that place value. So do I have 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. All right, so at this time, I want you to try these 4 problems on your own. So we got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So go ahead and pause this video at this time and try to work these 4 problems out. Okay, hopefully at this time you've paused the video and you've worked these 4 problems out. So let's see how you did. Okay, so number 1 should have been 5 and 6/10 times 8, or times 10 to the 8. The next one, you'll see you need to subtract exponents. So I get 1 and 6/10 times 10 to the 7. The next 2 we will have to adjust, and you can see that I wrote a couple of little hints here for you. Okay, and if you have questions or you got a little confused, make sure you ask about them. All right, so now let's apply this to some word problems. So this first one, I made it just a little bit easier. I was going to do it to where we are converting as well, but we're just going to keep everything in the same units. So a female flea consumes about 1 and 4/10 times 10 to the -5 liters of blood per day. A dog has 100 female fleas. How many liters of blood do the fleas consume? Well, first you got to figure out what kind of operation do we need to do. And remember, we talked about keywords. So the word per means I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to multiply 100 times 1.4 times 10 to the -5. The reason I'm multiplying this is because there's 100 fleas and they're each consuming that per day. Well, I want to rewrite 100 in scientific notation. So this is going to be 1 times 10 to the second. And then I'm going to multiply this whole thing by 1 times 4. And now we just follow our rules. So I would have 1 times 1 and 4/10. So I'm going to rewrite that. Not 5, 4. And we'll have times, and we need to add exponents. So I'm looking at my exponents here. So I have 10, 2 plus -5. Well, 1 times 1 and 4/10 is just 1 and 4/10. And when I add 2 and -5, I get -3. So the answer to this word problem should be 1 and 4/10 times 10 to the -3. All right, let's look at another a little bit more challenging example. So this one says the area of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary is about 9 and 6/10 times 10 to the 3rd square kilometers. The area of the Florida Reef Tract is about 16.2% of the area of the sanctuary. What is the area of the Florida Reef Tract in square kilometers? Well, this might be a little bit easier if we draw ourselves a little picture. So we'll just assume that this is the area of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. So remember, it said the area of that is 9 and 6/10 times 10 to the 3rd. Okay, and then a piece of it is 16.2%. We want to know what is the area of the rest of it. Okay, so of is our key word here, and of means to multiply. So that means we have to multiply these. So I'm going to start with 9 and 6/10 times 10 to the 3rd. And I want to multiply that by 16.2%. But remember, that means we need to move the decimal place. Okay, so if I want to change this to a decimal, I got to move it 2 places. So this becomes 0 and 162 thousandths. So I'm multiplying those. So we can multiply 0 and 162 thousandths times 9.6, or we can change this to scientific notation. Either way. If we want to change it to scientific notation, we have to move that decimal place back 1. So I get 9 and 6/10 times 10 to the 3rd times 1 and 62 hundredths. I moved it to the right. So I'm going to add an exponent. So this would be 10 to the 1. Okay, so from there, I'm going to multiply 9 and 6/10 times 1 and 62 hundredths. And then I'm going to add the powers of 10. Okay, so from there, multiply 9 and 6/10 times 1 and 62 hundredths. And we would get 552 thousandths. So now I need to move that decimal place. So I've got to move it back one. Which means I'm going to subtract an exponent here. Okay, so just like that hint I showed you on the previous page, if we move it to the right, we want to subtract an exponent. So our final answer here becomes 1 times 10 to the third. Okay. Hopefully at this time you've begun to understand multiplying and dividing in scientific notation. You are ready to move on to your next assignment.